Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. You're a wild kid. Well, from a long line and walking. I think somebody asked me why do they think saw those in the email. And I thought, that's what I stole that from exactly what's name my master. Same thing. We do the same thing.
These things.
Remember, the search supplies, we played the very first basketball team. 19-year-old. In the early time, and he went to Denver and right, they already had it.
Why not?
And by the early 1990s, there were basketball teams all over the country, and so Ryan. And so that's where the case. And that I've seen, the uniform line say K and does that and he graduated in 19.
Connected to Cycle 1 Grove.
Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. So grab a cookie, grab a coffee. Now's your time.
Yes, I am. I am giving. It's on the building.
And they saw their. They're on, and those guys said, I can't do that, that way you do, they go, can't get us, they'll do it. It's so, yeah. Every year. And it was supposed to get on that first day. She lived through the first year. My favorite.
Oh, they say that.
Day, fixed everything with the water and it got it. Ready?
They say.
Yeah, it's right. Christopher Kirk, yeah, but he's. Yes. There we go. All of it, he did some. Visited all the great history and all the. Yeah, it's
Settled.
We started.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Bell. I'm the director of the Kansas Museum of History. So glad to welcome you all to our Museum After Hours program. And before we get to our guest speaker tonight, I'd first like to thank the Kansas Historical Foundation for funding an upgrade to our sound system. And to Kansas, yes, let's hear it. And to Kansas Historical Society staff members, Craig Dannenberg and Connor Bray, for doing all the hard work of installing. We now have 16 ceiling-mounted speakers throughout the room, managed by a digital audio mixer and amplifier, as well as new microphones. All right. You should be able to hear us loud and clear. Your donation to the foundation helps to support projects like these. So thank you for your support. Your donations also help support us bringing in phenomenal speakers like our guest tonight. Please consider making a donation to the foundation's education fund, either through cash in the jar in the back or online. And just while I have your attention, looking ahead to next month on April 10th, our second Friday, the Museum After Hours program is going to be former Kansas Historical Society staff member Katie Kutkeisen, who's going to be speaking on the Dust Bowl. So mark your calendars now. But now it is time for me to introduce our guest speaker tonight. I met Jim Richardson about a year ago when he came to offer to donate many of his cameras and loan his father's camera to us. Many of these cameras are currently on display in our new gallery. If you have not yet gotten a chance to see them, I highly encourage you to go do so. They're in the Power of the Press section within Changing Kansas. Additionally, Jim let us use many of his striking and beautiful images for the new gallery. We have 17 total Jim Richardson images on display in there, and our gallery is more dynamic and beautiful thanks to your work. Jim Richardson has built his photographic career around visual storytelling, by creating groundbreaking work in documentary, resource issues, environmental photography, and the critical concerns of feeding the planet. Before concentrating his working life at National Geographic for the last 40 years, he was noted for his innovative documentary narratives of rural life and adolescence that won him special recognition in the World Understanding Contest 3 times. For National Geographic, he pioneered fresh visual narratives of water issues in the 1990s before beginning his work on food, agricultural development, and the problems surrounding feeding our growing and hungry world. Since his first story in 1984, which was on the flooding of the Great Salt Lake, he has photographed 32 Nat Geo magazine assignments and another 20 for National Geographic Traveler. Besides teaching at the Missouri Photo Workshop, Summit Workshops, Santa Fe Photo Workshops, and many others, he speaks worldwide on food issues and his longtime fascination with the culture and landscape of Scotland. For his work on light pollution, the International Dark Sky Association named him a Dark Sky Defender. The Native Sons and Daughters of Kansas named him Kansan of the Year in 2008. Among his awards he is proudest of is that his fellow National Geographic photographers named him their photographer's photographer in 2014, and that the people of Cuba, Kansas, population 186, named him their honored citizen. In 2017, Kansas State University bestowed an honorary doctorate for his work in cultural and environmental communications. Richardson lives in Lindsborg, Kansas, where he and his wife, Kathy, work at Small World Gallery on Main Street. Please join me in welcoming Jim Richardson.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. How am I doing out there? You got the sound out there up? All right. Very good. Kathy in the back corner says she can hear me. This is not always a good deal. Listen, so what a pleasure to be here. Sarah, thank you for having me here. Thank you to all of the folks here at the Kansas History Museum and the archive for everything you do to keep our story of life here in Kansas alive and getting richer all the time. So if I can share a little bit with you all this evening along those lines, it is a great pleasure. I must say, as this goes, that it's a bit daunting to wander out in the museum and see yourself in a museum. I think it's proof that the secret in life is to live long enough that they make a museum exhibit out of you, And however, I think that it is opening up some employment opportunities for me because I think I've got a future as a reenactor, reenacting myself. And I've been practicing. It's not easy being a reenactor. I've been working on the accent. And while most people, I would think I sound a lot like me, I know what it could actually be. So I'm still working on the accent, and I will be out in the halls here at some point or another. Reenacting, can I do that, Sarah? Oh yeah, what's she gonna say when you got an audience in front of you? That's the thing is, audiences are sort of captive, and thank you for coming. I know you could be bowling or watching Landman or something like this. I don't know, but you're here, so thank you very much. Given that, I intend to. This is a big self-indulgence tonight, really, of talking, well, essentially about National Geographic, but also talking about myself. And so I'm warning you, it's going to be a little shameless, and I am going to be the hero of much of what you hear. We are all the heroes of our own life, and you've been warned. So there you go. But what I'm going to be talking to you about is that era of National Geographic, which was a golden era, and you're talking maybe 1975 on for a lot of it. My experience, as Sarah mentioned, started in 1984 with my first story. And it was a golden era of hundreds of people, incredible experts, explorers, scientists, historians, cartographers, all of these people, a staff of, I think we had a staff of about 900, people endeavoring to create the greatest magazine in the world, if they could. I mean, that was the goal. That was the intent. They had incredible resources, which will become apparent in some of the things I want to show you tonight. And there was never any excuse. Sometimes as a photographer, you can go out the door and say, well, if I was working for National Geographic, I'd work harder, or I would be at a better time or something like this. And after a while, I kind of realized that I was going out the door and I was working for National Geographic, and they were supporting me with incredible amount of resources, background information, staff support, all this. I had no excuses, just absolutely no excuses. And so it was a bit daunting, but it was also an opportunity to do things that you probably didn't get to do at many other publications. And I had already worked by the time I started at National Geographic for Sports Illustrated and Time, Newsweek, and a bunch of the others. So I kind of knew the magazine world, as well as the Topeka Capital Journal. Some of you probably remember me being one of those people on the staff working for Rich Clarkson, legendary Rich Clarkson, who had put together an incredible staff of photographers, young, hungry photographers, anxious to make their mark on the world in very intense competition, and bringing to the pages of the Capital Journal first-class photojournalism, which is why several newspaper photographers of the year were from the Capital Journal, Pulitzer Prize winners, people who went on to work for National Geographic. I'll show you some of those folks tonight as we go along. So I had I had a bit of a charmed beginning because I started my newspaper career here in Topeka. It really was perhaps the very best place for a young photographer to come out of Kansas State University and start their photographic career. As an intern, a summer intern, we had another summer intern that year, a guy named Jim Ryan, who was a much better miler than I was, but I was a better photographer, I can guarantee you that. So, all right, so wall walks. By the time we're done tonight, you're going to know what a wall walk was and why it was so scary and why I have called my presentation Wall Walks, Insider Pool at National Geographic. I think it's wise for any audience sitting out there to ask a question of themselves. Is this guy, does he know what he's talking about? Does he actually, is this for real? So I want to start the presentation tonight with this picture. Old timer. And there at the photographer seminar in Washington, D.C., where about 130 of us got together for our annual gathering, Vince Musey is over there as his MC, and he's claiming that I've been around National Geographic so long that I was in the original picture of the founders. It was an honor, really. But yeah, National Geographic did a lot of stuff. And so even for we photographers it was our business to work for the magazine, to go around and see all the covers in the hallways there. And it was an irresistible temptation to go find your cover in the midst of all of that and think that somehow or another this was, you were part of this long ongoing tradition. And to be able to do certain things because of that one of my pictures could end up when we were doing the Power of Photography exhibit at the Annenberg Museum in Los Angeles. to have the picture of the Flint Hills and the Milky Way over the Flint Hills, included in something like this. A power to address subjects that maybe nobody else would have done. Certainly that would be the case for the Flint Hills. And so I want to start tonight in the meat of things, a foot in the door. How the heck do you get going on a story at National Geographic? And the primary thing that you would do to start a story is you'd write one of these things, a story proposal. Because it was essential that you not treat your photographic career as an exercise in sitting by the phone and waiting for it to ring. You needed to become part of the information flow. You needed to become part of the creative energy of the content of the magazine in order to have a chance to be thought of, to be an integral part. Whenever anybody ever thought about doing stories, you want your name to come to mind. So writing story proposals was the key thing. Not everybody did it, but mostly photographers who wrote story proposals did more stories. Because usually, if you got your story proposal approved, you got the story. Obviously, if I wrote a story proposal about climbing Mount Everest, I probably wasn't going to photograph that one. All right. So, but otherwise, yeah. So what I'd like to do starting out right here, though, is start out with a story proposal. This is the story proposal that brought about was approved on the Flint Hills and resulted in the story in 2007 on the Flint Hills, Tallgrass, the Unknown National Park and Flyover Land. We had been doing, this opportunity came up because we had been doing a series of stories on national parks. And then we'd done Grand Canyon and Zion and all the biggies, and I thought, well, why not? Come on, let's have a go at it. It's not exactly a national park, but why not? Particularly because nobody else was going to do it. Nobody else was going to come up with that proposal. And so I had it. So what I wanted to do right now is I want to start in here, read you a bit of this story proposal, give you a sense of what a story proposal was. And first thing to be said about that is it's not the outline of the text. It's a story in the broader sense, not just of what the text is going to say, not just of what the pictures are going to say, but what the whole package is going to be once it gets in the magazine. And the whole product is the completed story in the magazine. The headlines, the maps, the legends, the captions, as they were called at National Geographic, all of that together to tell a story. So the story proposal is about convincing people that there is a story there. So it's about the genesis of the story, the architecture, how it's going to be built, the visual richness that's possible, and why. Why this place? Why now? So as I read through this for a little bit here, let me start in. Far from any shore, across the undulating Flint Hills of Kansas, waves of grass blanket the bed of the Permian Sea. Spring fires ravage the banked hills, death and transfiguration preceding new life. Prairie grasses, mingling promiscuously, dig deep through the hard-hearted flint and limestone to create a biomass of iceberg proportions. So much unseen and known to so much of America. Right there, I'm putting in a little clue to say, we have a story here to do that our readers don't know about, and this would be a service, okay? And here at the Tallgrass National Prairie Preserve is a national park like no other. Next paragraph is a lot of details. Created in 1996, preserved 10,861 acres, National Park Service, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, let me go on. Proud of their century-long stewardship, Flint Hills ranchers are determined to continue the tradition. But to most Americans, the song of the Flint Hills remains unsung. The area glimpsed, if at all, during long windshield hours of plains travel, Only 30 to 100 miles wide, the region passes quickly at interstate speeds. Mostly, though, it goes unnoticed from 35,000 feet. Now, there's a little bit of an appeal here to the editors to say, you can show them something they haven't seen. That's a subtle thing that I'm trying to build into this proposal. It is perhaps our most unknown national park. That's not only a shame, the ignorance menaces the whole Flint Hills regions now, as now, it is threatened. The Flint Hills landscape is lyrical and deeply incised valleys waltzing gracefully into the distance, eroded from the bed of the once tropical Permian Sea. Hard flint and limestone layers are benched up to the dead level horizon. Shale between erodes into concave hollows like the cowboys here. It is a quiet land that doesn't have to say much to speak volumes. Quiet except when the booming grounds fill with male prairie chickens blinded by lust in their springtime ritual winner takes all sex lottery. If you're writing a story proposal, it never hurts to get a little sex in there, okay? Nor quiet when the thunderstorms tower like prairie cathedrals, buttressed with lightning bolts thrusting to the ground, bringing fire, black twisters, and hammering hail. That was a nice paragraph, but I almost got myself in serious trouble because once I say that to these folks, they think they're going to see that picture. If I don't come back with it, I'm in big trouble. Because that's what's happening here right now is they're developing a mental picture of what this thing could look like. And one of the things I have to convince them of is there's going to be enough pictures to make a good story out of it. That's one of the big things. Nor quiet when flames engulf the hills, stampeding through the night, feeding on the winter-killed grass, releasing in seconds nutrients long locked away, leaving blackened swaths miles wide, which will soon enough grow into lushness. The green is leavened with wild blue indigo, larkspur, and coneflower. By turns, the hills will be verdant in summer, turning coppery in auburn and in the fall. And now I want to get to the point where I can say something about why it's important, not just interesting, but important that we should cover this area. So I'm going to make this pitch. But the Flint Hills are approaching a new season, one never before seen. On summer days, red-tailed hawks laze over the cusps of the hills, their wings filled with prairie winds, the same winds that bring lust to the hearts of wind farm promoters. This was at a time in which wind farms were being planned for large areas of the Flint Hills area. Today, the battle is joined as our need for renewable energy clashes with our passion for this serene landscape. Shall we give over the horizon to wind farms the size of townships, or shall we learn to cherish these hills through understanding? The Flint Hills are a gem our readers would like to discover. Now is the time. Okay, so Geographic would get a lot of story proposals coming in from photographers, writers, editors, explorers, grantees, whoever. About once a month, they'd have a meeting, they'd take all those proposals and they would green light, like 6 or 7 that month. So at National Geographic, basically, you could think that each issue had about 5 major stories in it. So at 12 months a year, that's about 60 stories a year. You could think that, as I said back at the photographer seminar, we had about 130 people who got invited to that. So what that means is that you got 60 people chasing, or you got 130 people chasing 60 stories a year, maybe 70. They might have 100 stories working at any one time. What that meant, though, was that 1 story a year was good, if you could do that. 2 stories was really tough to get done. And a lot of people went 2 or 3, 4 years between stories. So it wasn't a paying proposition. You couldn't make a living working for National Geographic exclusively. That's what the meaning of that. So, okay, so let's go on here though. Now, so you got that proposal in mind, all my flowery paragraphs there, okay, to some of the pictures that actually then came out of that. out on Josh and Gwen Hoy's ranch outside of Emporia when they were out there burning the prairie. 4 Mile Creek Road, man, I had a long day out there. I was pretty black with soot by the time I got done with that day out there with the fire. Flying over the hills down by Bazaar. What a great name for a town, right? Yeah, Bazaar. Looking down on the patterns that came about from the burning of the Flint Hills. Okay, so one of the things that I understood shooting this was that, see, what I'd established was kind of a biblical fire, death, rebirth kind of story arc in here. Not a story arc for the writer, but a story arc for the visuals. So yes, if I have this picture on one page, I know that 5 or 6 weeks later, I'm going to be out looking for this picture, and it needs to be green. It needs to be absolutely green and verdant, because that's what I want. When you do that turn of the page, I want you to go from the fire and the raging consumption of the fire, into this rich greenness. Now, at Small World Gallery, we have people come in, and we got a bunch of these cards there. And if you come out to Small World Gallery, we would be glad to see you. And if you want to buy some cards, well, we'd be glad to sell them to you. Now, what is interesting about this card, though, is that people come in and they say, "What part of Ireland is that?" So it's one of my pleasures as a Kansas boy to say, no, it's our Flint Hills. Other people will say, "Oh, it's just not that green." And I say, well, yeah, actually it is. You need to go look at your own state a little bit more. It's absolutely that green. So then all of the other aspects of it, the wildflowers, I don't know why we don't get so much attention for our wonderful wildflowers here out in the Flint Hills as, say, Texas Hill Country gets, Remember about the tornadoes and the buttressed thunderstorms and the black twisters and all that? Didn't get that picture. Didn't get that picture. I got that picture. And it had that sense of this storm racing through. It's on the Tall Grass Preserve. I got there a minute or two before it got to me. I chased it for about 60 miles, and I got out there on that little winding road, and it was gone in about 2.5 minutes, and it was just magnificent. And what you get, by the way, I got lucky because you can see there's a little bit of blue up there, so some light is coming through from behind. And with the light coming through from behind, you can see the rain. Almost never do you get to be able to see the rain in a picture. It just turns gray. So for all of my planning and thinking, there's still serendipity. And a storm like that, especially with that windy little road out there. But I tell you what, I was in my car. I turned the car kind of sideways so that I could sit in the car and look out the window because, well, I wasn't going to stand out in the lightning. And I'm just photographing like crazy. When you get those things, you have this moment in which you say, "My God, I'm standing in front of something exceptional." And you think, don't screw it up, Jim. You've screwed up so many pictures in your life. Don't screw this up. Get it. So it's a matter of intense shooting. And I don't remember what I shot in those 2.5 minutes, 300 or 400 pictures, something like that. Yeah, work it hard. Absolutely work it hard, and hope that you get it right. Same thing out there with the fireflies, except I only got one frame of them. I got one frame. It was so dark I could not see through the camera, so I just had to set it up on the tripod and point it out there, and turn the focusing ring where I thought it might be, and I shot a picture and it was focused too far away, so I turned the ring back a little bit. I can't tell you how much. Nothing scientific is going on here, Turned it back a little bit, and it was good enough, and I went on shooting, and I got this guy, okay? You see that guy flashing? Flash, 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 all around here. That's one firefly during a 67-second exposure, Yeah, when you get back to Washington and you're looking through your pictures that you got, yeah, when you get one of these, you go, and you got one frame of it, you go, good deal. Good deal. Because also, what that means is I've got orange fire, I've got green grass inverted, and then I've got this color step off. I've got the storm that has a different character to it. I've got this picture that's got another color step off to it. And then the other thing that I wanted to do out of this was say, you know, we've got something else. We've got dark skies. We've got the Milky Way out there. And one of my great pleasures when students come into our gallery is I can say, hey, you ever think what it'd look like if you lived inside of a galaxy? You know, and they kind of get their attention. And I say, well, you do. You do live inside of a galaxy. That's our galaxy right there. And right out there in the middle is the core of the galaxy. And our black hole in the core of our galaxy is right there where that kind of horse figure is, you know. So yes, it's really kind of an exceptional place. And it's not a lesser place because it's not in Africa or Antarctica. It's not a lesser place. And we, as Kansans, can't let ourselves think about our state as if it were. I know that there were people who saw some of these pictures and they said, you know, I drove by that pasture every day going to work and nobody ever told me it was something. Well, so if I could tell people it's something, you know, even our folks here in our state, that's a good thing. Okay, so this would have been a places, people and places story. These are how we thought about our categories of stories at National Geographic. Natural history, stones and bones, okay, archaeology and all that, stones and bones stories. Science, people and places, environment. And this is an actual ranking of stories for 6 months in the magazine. You see the Lincoln train was #1, people and places. That Lincoln history, you know, that's pretty good. First Americans, stones and bones, rewilding orcas, anything nature, anything with big animals, you know, cuddly animals, right to the top. Notice that what's down at the bottom, Ebola. Okay, yeah, Ebola is a hard sell for a story, an important story, and the editor of the magazine will do several nature stories in order to be able to do one Ebola. You know, sneak it in the magazine, get it in there because yeah, it's important, but it's not going to be the most popular story we can possibly do that month. So yeah, all that kind of that kind of information there. We watch this stuff, we photographers, because here's the thing, is Geographic might do a nature story, at least one nature story, maybe 2 every month. So if you're a wildlife photographer, you've got somewhere between 12 and 20 stories a year that the magazine might do. If you're stones and bones, then we're going to do 8 stories a year, you know. Culture stories, fewer yet, and you just didn't have that many possible stories. So if all you do is bird photography, they're going to do an exclusively a bird story twice a year maybe. So if you're a bird photographer, you don't have many story opportunities. If you're a nature photographer, like big mammals or landscapes or things like this, you got a lot more opportunities. One of the reasons why I wanted to be able to do not just one kind of photography, because people will ask me, what kind of photography do you like to do? And I said, I like to do stories, you know, because if I was just a landscape photographer, I get cubbyholed over there. If I'm a bird photographer, I really get cubbyholed, you know, and I don't want to do that. And I wanted to be able to take on all kinds of stories that came along, like food safety and water and genetically modified foods and things like this, totally out, which not many other photographers would want to take on. So yes, and then there would be the big fight for position. So when our story on Orkney archaeology got #2 story of the year, my picture editor, Ken Geiger, was hot and heavy getting on the phone and calling me about that. So yes, that was part of the landscape amongst us photographers, is where does your story end up working? That story was originally scheduled for 16 pages and we got it up to 28. So yeah, that was a big accomplishment that we really enjoyed. Now, about doing stories, the best photographer ever in my book at Geographic was Jim Stanfield. Jim Stanfield could take on anything and make it sing, you know. There are a lot more famous photographers, but Jim Stanfield was the best. I'm not in the same league as Jim Stanfield. I was pretty good, and I'm not in that league, you know. Jim Stanfield was excellent. So Jim Stanfield had a very practical way of thinking about doing stories. And one night I'm back there wandering the halls, you know, people would be there late at night editing on their stories and whatnot. Stanfield was there. I stuck my head in and I said, so the Geographic did the France issue, and they had a photographer go out and do a story on a village in France that got killed, and then you got assigned to it, right? And he did, and he went off, and about 6 weeks later, he came back with a great story on a French village, just what you need for a whole issue on France in 1989, right? So I said, what happened on that first village with that photographer where it failed? And he said, wrong village. They picked the wrong village. They picked a village that had historical importance, that had artist connections, that had literary connections, but it was a poor visual vehicle. It didn't have sidewalk cafes. It didn't have all the stuff that you want to be able to take pictures of. I mean, real practical, take pictures of. So that was his analysis. Wrong village. Another time I was walking the halls late one night and I stuck my head in and I said, so, you know that photographer that went down to Louisiana to do a story, and great photographer, one of our best ever photographers. But that story just didn't sing. And I said, so, and I'm not going to tell you a name right now because it doesn't matter to you, but I said, what happened with that photographer who's so famous, and he comes back with a mediocre story on a set of pictures on that story? And he said, no costumes. No costumes, meaning this photographer was great anytime he was out amongst populations, cultures that were defined by costumes. But if they were ordinary folks who wore seed caps and blue jeans, you know, he was pretty lost. Does it really come down to such simple things as that? Actually, yeah, quite a bit. Do you have the stuff out in front of you to actually make the pictures? So the next thing I want to talk about is a story about how do you do it? How do you take this thing? And I'm going to talk about the Colorado River here. And there's Hoover Dam down there and the Colorado River backing up into Lake Mead. So, but you think about covering a river, and it's a big river, you know, go 7 states, 9 states, is it? Where to begin? What do you do? I was a little bit lost. I went to my picture editor, Dennis Dimmick, on it. I said, so how do you start, you know? Because you can't just go get in a canoe and float down it. All you're going to get is pictures of trees on the bank. That's what you're going to get from a canoe. You can't do that, because this was a water resource story. So how do you do that? And he said, okay, here's what you do. You have we're budgeted for 24 pages. Okay, so you have 24 pages, that's 12 spreads. Okay. Each spread can say one thing. What are the 12 things you want to say? Comes down to something like this. What are the 12 things about the Colorado River that you want to say? I'm gonna throw some out here for you. The water comes from the Colorado Rockies, high up in the mountains there. The river is rich in history and controversy. Wilderness is threatened. It waters the dry Southwest. The river is heavily managed, a lot of plumbing, you know, Hoover Dam. Growth depends on the river. Recreation is a prime user. Mexico gets their share, and the river never gets to the sea. So with those ideas in mind, then I go start looking for places where I can photograph them. And what I aimed to do in my research was to come up with 3 can't miss, drop dead, impossible to screw up chances for each of those ideas. That's what I wanted. In the end, I photographed 100 subjects for that story over 12 weeks in the field. So here's what it ends up looking like. So here's the water comes from the high Rocky Mountains. Wilderness areas are threatened by loss of water, and that's Martin Litton. He's the guy who kept them from putting dams into the Grand Canyon. If you remember that, going back to that, some of you are nodding your heads. You remember that stuff, huh? Right? So Martin Litton down there. Whoops. River is heavily managed. That's why I'm doing a story there, a picture of Hoover Dam. And but photographically, I had to think about this. What am I going to do? Because Hoover Dam's been photographed a lot, right? I mean, Ansel Adams and everybody else has photographed it. So finally, I thought, I've got this gets a little techie, a 21 millimeter f2 lens for my Olympus. And we have now Kodachrome 200 at the time, 200 that you could push to ASA 500. Many photographers out there know what the hell I'm talking about? Okay, got it. All right, yeah, all right. So 500. Oh my gosh, it was incredible. And I got a helicopter, and the guy hovered. He could hover above the dam there as it got darker, and all I had to do was call up the guys at the dam there and say, those big lights that you got on the dam at night? I said, would you turn them on early for me tonight? Yeah, so I guess if you're National Geographic, you can call up and say, we'd like to take a nice picture of your dam. Will you turn on the lights for me? They'll do it. Yeah, so it was great fun. The Colorado water is the dry southwest. So when I find someplace where the canal goes through sand dunes, yeah, man, I want that. Growth depends on river water. That water out in that's Palm Spring, that comes from the Colorado River. I just got to make sure that I understand it. Where did that water come from? Because somebody's going to check on stuff like that, Recreation is a prime user of the water river, So yeah, when I found out about that party on Copper Canyon, yeah, I want to be there. Yeah, there you go. So Mexico gets their share. You're never sure when you think about doing that, where's that picture going to come from and what's it going to look like? But if you're looking for it, if you're looking for a way of saying that. So this is the Colorado River by here is dry because they've taken all the water and put it into that irrigation canal that these squatters are building the houses next to. Nice family, great fun with them that evening. The river never gets to the sea. Now, that is not a picture you're going to put on a gallery wall, but for a picture that says that's the last of the Colorado River sinking into the sands before it ever gets to the ocean. So that makes it a very important picture. Right on target. So understand about this. I'm not doing art. I don't mean to be an artist. I'm not doing photography as art. I don't see the pages of National Geographic as a gallery for my precious artwork. I'm doing pictures that tell a story of the subject in a meaningful way and that somebody can write about. So next, how are you going to find all that stuff? Now, this gets even nerdier. And I was pretty well known as a nerdy photographer, and there are strengths of that and there are some weaknesses. I'm going to show you both of them. So finding the right stuff, because if you ever look me up on the internet, Jim Richardson quote about photography, you find this: if you want to be a better photographer, stand in front of more interesting stuff. I first said that to an audience at a travel photography workshop we were doing, because photographers get really ego bound about their skill at turning knobs and taking pictures of meaningless stuff and making it look cool. And I wanted to say to them, why don't you just spend your time finding interesting stuff to stand in front of? That's part of the job, is show us something. Show us something. If you want to be a better photographer, stand in front of more interesting stuff. This quote gets around, by the way. I've got a collection of people around the world who posted on Instagram in about 20 languages. It's really kind of a fun thing to do. So from my previous stories, I found out that just putting notes in a notebook when I found something didn't do it, because I wanted to collect a lot more stuff. I wanted to be able to gather great possibilities and then to be able to sort them and pick amongst them. So I built this database. There's the database from the Colorado River. There's the entry for the aerial of Hoover Dam. You see that I had 392 records in that database of things that I had found to photograph, possibilities. And then I could sort them. I could call them number one for sures, and number two, pretty goods, and number threes, no, maybe, and number fours were a fat chance. And I could rate them, and I could sort them by state and the location. So if I was going to Colorado, I could get all the number ones and photograph all those things. So here's the database that developed then into the Great Plains and things I was collecting. I did 570 records there. So I had that many things that I had researched or found, possible subjects. So there's Ardmore, South Dakota, nearly abandoned. And here's haying at the Nebraska sandhills as a storm approached. And then I could have a place to put in the captions that I would send to the National Geographic and all those kinds of things. It was important stuff to do. So here is there's my prime subjects to go. These are subjects that are primes that I haven't shot yet. So I can kind of just keep winnowing it down as I keep working on this thing. There's one, Sandhills branding at the Haythorne Ranch in Nebraska. That was next to the bottom one. And here's a couple of pictures from that situation. That's a great situation. If you can find that, if you can get to the Haythorne Ranch, you got a pretty good place. All the cowboys, they always did it up great. They were out branding for 30 days. It was just a terrific situation. There's the morning parade at the Crow Fair out in Montana, the Crow Reservation. So there is that was the winner of the best decorated car entry in the parade. So yeah, so in other words, they're living in the same world we live in, but with a twist, right? It's an interesting twist and fun to do. Hawks Home School in Montana, so looking down that list, I see that I've got ranching, working cattle in the Flint Hills, Pine Ridge bison management classes, Assiniboine Tribal Buffalo Operation, Peerless High School graduates one senior. I mean, don't you think you want to be there on graduation night when they have one senior in a little town of 40 people? Yeah, that's a good chance. Next to the bottom is Hawks Home One-Room School in Montana. That's Hawks Home One-Room School. Yeah. So I went to a one-room school. So I wanted to, I'm kind of biased. I'm going to get in a one-room school if we're doing a Great Plains story, There's Ardmore, South Dakota, nearly abandoned. And there it is. Yeah. So not that I knew what Ardmore looked like when I went out the door, but I know that I want to do abandonment. And so when I see Ardmore, I gotta go, oh yeah, there's one I've been looking for. Yeah. So I at least would know the concept of what it is that I'm looking for. And then this caption list by film roll. Okay. This is why the legends at National Geographic were the captions. This is why the caption writers loved me, because I would send them all this information. And now out of that database, for instance, here's the printout of all the stuff that I have for the Columbia River story. So every story's got one of these kind of documents. And it's also why the folks at the archive over here like this, because I got phone numbers and contacts and dates and every last thing about the shooting of all those pictures, National Geographic had photographers who would come back. There was one photographer in particular who was famous as one of the greatest photographers in the world. The picture that he shot. Okay, he would come back from 3 months in Italy, and all the captions would say Italy. And the caption writers would have to go take that picture and go start sending them to, museums and say, do you know where this is? Can you tell me who's this person? And they would find them. It was just, but me, I gave them all this stuff. So they liked me. Yeah. So out of all that, yes, is how you end up, with the pictures that say things like, I went to the Triple U Bison Ranch. I went there, same reason Kevin Costner went there to shoot Dances with the Wolves. Bison herd, rolling grasslands, no trees, looks like prairie. So yeah, that's what I want to do. Or that I wanted to do a picture of distance. And so I went looking for someplace. And when I got to Pawnee National Grasslands and saw 7 miles of telephone poles, yeah, hallelujah. There we go. So that's kind of looking for point pictures. One night I went out to dinner with Chris Johns, who was at the Capital Journal here. And by then he was the editor of National Geographic magazine. And he said to me, Jim, you know what the rap is on your photography? Too many point pictures. What's a point picture? That's a point picture on the Ogallala Aquifer. A man with a meter, okay? A man with a meter. Same man, nicer light, stuff. A man with a stick. Okay, point pictures. Yeah, it's all said something about relative plant growth and all this, but it doesn't actually sing, does it? So too many point pictures. At which point I realized, yeah, I can't. I gotta do better. I gotta learn better. My photography has to get better. So by way of extension, saying that, so yeah, when I got around to doing the King James Bible, which is a difficult story to do because, well, you're going to take pictures of the book, and you go one book picture, and I'm kind of done doing book pictures, aren't I? Yeah. So I do the King James Bible, and by the way, this is not at Oxford, where they want to charge us about £1,000 for an hour with their book. This is in Baldwin City, Kansas. Baker University has a hell of a Bible collection, and they've got 2 King James Bibles. They got a his and a hers, if anybody knows what the difference is on a King James Bible. So yeah, we went down there, spent 3 days working to get that one picture. So, but I had to do things that were symbolic of something, the meaningful. One of the things was that one of the entities who wanted a exclusive translation in English of the Bible was the church, because it had a monopoly on the money that came from all of those funerals and weddings and all that stuff, wealth connected to the crown. So that picture there turned out to be the picture that we did of that. The other one was the Puritans. And that's a harder picture to get today because there are not so many Puritans around. But if you go out to a Church of Scotland on the Isle of Lewis, you pretty much got Puritans, and they don't have any wealth showing. They got no stained glass, no crosses, no nothing. They've got the book. And they've got these pews, and the pews have shelves so that you sit there and read the Bible as the minister reads the Bible out loud to you. It's about the word and no dressing, So I had gotten better by the time I did this story because I could do that. Now, there's one other thing about that story. It was lots of research and finding stuff. Out in Colorado one time, I had seen a baptism in a mountain church in a stock tank. And I thought, I want to find something like this. So I started doing research and was having a hard time finding it. And finally, one day I did a Google search for Cowboy Bible, and up came number 2 in the Google search there was Cowboy Edition King James Bible. And there's a cowboy up on a mountain on the cover, the cowboy up on a mountain ridge looking off into the valley, and it says, if it ain't King James, it ain't Bible. So I called up the publisher of it, and I said, I'm looking to find a circuit riding minister who uses the King James Bible. And he sent me to Brother Romewager, who did horsemanship sermons using scripture from the King James Bible and he would go into an arena with a wild horse, and he's mic'd up kind of like I am tonight, and he goes in there and he starts doing this sermon. Within 15 minutes, the horse is laying on the ground, and 20 minutes, he's riding it around the arena, Lakota, Sioux, on the Arizona Apache Reservation, bull rider, movie stuntman, Brother Romewager. More interesting stuff? Yeah, you want to find Brother Wormwager if you're going to do one of those things. And then somehow or another, I remembered. I thought, didn't I once hear that the Rastafarians of Jamaica use the King James Bible? And I went and looked, and bingo, they did. So that's why we ended up down there. They are reading Psalms 3 times a day from the King James Bible. Yeah. So a lot of research doing that, but also the pictures I'll have to sing. So now we get down to the wall walk. Okay. I teased this at the beginning, and now we're going finally going to get there. The wall walk, because after you've done all those pictures and you've done all the editing, I want to go through some of that. You end up in which you're trying to sell the editor and everybody that this is the story we should be doing. That is the room where we did wall walk at National Geographic. And this is all about the moment of truth, because it could be 2 years that you've been working on this thing, and if it doesn't fly now, you're dead. We always said that you could, as a photographer, you could survive one mediocre story, but not two, because we were all freelancers. And you couldn't get on with that. So this is the film era, right? Kodachrome, right? Paul Simon and all. And we're going through all of this film. Usually, a lot of my stories, bigger stories, would be about 1,000 rolls of film. I'll show you that in just a second. That you have to go through, and these are all those yellow boxes of Kodachrome, say, or Ektachrome, or whatever else it was. All those boxes, you got to go through it. And we had a way of doing it. This is my picture editor, Dennis Dimmick. It is not spring burning. That's a wrong, bad caption there. Don't read that. Dennis Dimmick is sitting there, and he's sitting at a Garrett box. A Garrett box. We had an editor named Bill Garrett, Wilbur Garrett, and he invented the Garrett box. It's a projector with a stack loader on it, so you could put a stack of slides in there, and a front surface mirror back there, projecting back here, so you could sit at a desk, you could open up that box of Kodachrome, stick them in the stack loader, and go through them, click, 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 and pull good ones. So here's the thing. If you shot horizontals and verticals, as you're going through there, they're going to be flipping back and forth. So we had interns, and what National Geographic interns did was go through all those boxes of slides before they ever got to us in editing and stick them so that they were all oriented the right way, and take a Sharpie and draw a strip down the side of it here, so that if this line was all on one side, they were all oriented correctly. Yeah, it's just insane stuff. On a grueling 10-hour day, you could do 200 boxes of slides. So and when it came time for editing, I would go back to Washington, and you sit there and you go through all of those slides. 1,000 rolls, that's 36,000 frames. You could do about 200 rolls a day. So a really grueling week, and you could get through the 1,000 rolls of film, and you would have your first cut, just the first cut. So the first cut, I'm going to do round numbers here. The first cut, this is stuff that could possibly be published. Good enough to be published somehow or another for some reason. And you'd end up with, out of those 36,000 frames, you'd end up with about 8,000 frames that you might publish. Good enough to publish. Then you'd go through those 7,000 again and do another cut. And by that time, you got down to about 3,000. And with each cut, you're looking for better pictures. You're rejecting stuff no, that doesn't cut it anymore, or something like this. My own experience was, when I did the first cut, I thought, why did I shoot all these crappy pictures? My God, and it's all junk, and they're going to find out that I'm no good, and this is the end of my career, So then you go through the second cut and you go, okay, there's a few frames in here. I think maybe it's possible so third cut, and you're down to, I'm saying Yeah, we're gonna be all right. We're gonna be all right. You know, fourth cut, I'm speaking about myself in the third person, you know, he's got an eye. Finally, we get down and we make up a tray and it's gonna be 80. A Kodak tray held 80 and we got it down to 80 to show the editors. Now, at this point, in order to tell this story, I'm gonna show you some bad video, but there's a good reason for it, okay? I had been out and for this I'll do the setup here. For this purpose, I had been out doing the Columbia River for the magazine. And by the way, when you got all those, say you got those 400 and you got the 400 on the light tables, at that point you would, instead of doing another cut, what you did was cherry picking, because the really great frames would start screaming at you that pick me. Yeah, pick me. That's a pick me frame. Yeah, that one's going to shout out at you. You know, that's going to get in the magazine one way or another. You know, you can see it from 3 or 4 feet away. Yeah. So those frames, Columbia River. Dennis Dimmick, I was done shooting the story. Dennis Dimmick called me up one day and he says, would you like to go out for another couple of weeks? And I said, I thought we were done. And he says, well, as it turns out, ABC Nightline wants to do a story about shooting a story for National Geographic, and they want to send a photo team out in the field, a film team out in the field with a photographer and follow them through the whole process of shooting pictures and the editing and the layouts and the whole thing. So I've got some of that to share with you here tonight. So I go out in the field, back on the Columbia River. I have to find subjects that you can photograph with a producer, a film cameraman, and a sound man all with you. And so there's a limit to how many kind of things. So back to the database, looking for subjects that we can go back to. And I decided we could go out with Bobby Begay, tribal fisherman out there on the Columbia River. And in fact, the film crew is right behind me when I shot this picture. And I think we ended up maybe making that the lead picture in the story. So not easy to do. I've done that several times in my career with a film crew, and it's a goofy business trying to do intimate photography while everybody's around behind you. So, but what I've got to show you to now is some of the Nightline episode when they do that. I'll apologize, the video is poor, the sound is probably poorer, but I can narrate a little bit of that. And so here is.
We follow photographer Jim Richardson through the arduous process of translating an assignment into photographs that will actually be published in the magazine. You will learn the difference between what most of us think we could do and what he does. Oh,
I like it when he says that stuff. So thank you very much. Yeah. So, okay. So now here we go into the session where we're not doing layout yet on the wall. We're showing that tray of 80 to the editor. And you're sitting in this room with all the gathering of about 8 or 10 editors around there to show them all these pictures, you know. And I'm sitting there with Kent Koberstein and Al Royce, and we're waiting for Bill Allen to show up, you know. And it's kind of like a tense moment after all this work.
It's too late to cram, Jim.
Bill Allen says, too late to cram.
Now we're showing the final trade to the editor of the magazine. This is the process we've spent.
Dennis is saying we've been working on this for 2 years.
And we've finished editing over 1,200 rolls of film, and this is the final exam.
When I walk into the room to look at that final projection session, I really do.
Bill Allen is sitting there
Clean everything out of my mind.
counting on his fingers.
Say, I am now coming at this as someone who has never.
If he gets to 10 good pictures,
I try and
thinks we're good.
poke holes into what they're doing, ask questions. You consider this. Do we have enough of that? Do we have enough of the other? No, we can't.
You guys have just created unbelievable headache.
Create a big problem for him. He's gonna have to tear up the magazine article already and give us more space.
We're gonna have to,
I think I like the sound of this.
we're gonna have to tear up the entire issue now.
Spectacular job, guys.
Thank you, Bill.
There you go.
Nice.
That was a moment of relief there when that happened, of course. You get the handshake. All right, so the ABC film crews in there. And that little bit about, oh, you've done such a good job, we're gonna have to tear up the magazine and give you more space and all that, you know. Bill had that well thought out in his mind, you know, he knew the camera was running, you know, and so you just got to take that as part of the theater of doing this kind of stuff. And then we go to layout. So what happens between that projection session and layout is that we go over to Robert Gray's office, and we take those 80 pictures, and in about 5 minutes, we cut it down to 40. You know, so stuff that I worked months on, you know, goes, yeah, it's not going to make it, is it? Sorry. And it goes away. We're down to 40, and we're going to do the layout out of about 40 pictures. We'll probably keep the others around maybe, but mostly it's going to be those 40 pictures. And we're going to get it down to about 20 pictures in the layout. So this is a bit of the kind of things that go on.
Sort of power and the power.
Layout stuck up there, move them around.
Layout, we may start with 80 pictures, but we may only.
Potential layouts,
20,
headlines,
So we get really.
all that kind of stuff.
in terms of which
So
picture-
this is another week, by the way, after all that editing. So this is another week of doing all those kinds of things. So insider pool, I promised you a little insider pool. What I wanted to do shooting these stories are some panoramas like that. This is a multiple frame stitch of the picture to make a very wide panorama, because it doesn't fit the magazine pages very well, but it will fit a gatefold. You know what a gatefold is? To magazine, and it folds open like this. And this picture made a double gatefold like this. All right. Layout editors like this stuff because it gives them a chance to change up their story pattern in the magazine, and it's a challenge for them to make it work and everything like this. So yeah, I wanted to be one of the people bringing in those wide panorama pictures. Not many other photographers did that, frankly. Many of them felt that the 2 to 3 frame that was originally made by Oscar Barnack when he made the first Leica and the 35mm lens is ordained by God or Greek myth as the sanctioned way that a photograph should look, you know, and you can't do anything about that, you know. And so a lot of photographers would not shoot these things because of a sense of propriety about pictures. But every time I did that kind of stuff, like the Flint Hills, you know, I could get extra pages. Now, so what happens here is if I have 24 pages and they do a gatefold, that's 26 pages now. And I just took 2 pages away from somebody else. There's a limited size of the hole in the magazine, you know. So, and many times that was the thing. You go in to show this tray, you could go in there, and we're budgeted for 18 pages. And you go to lunch and you come back and the picture editor says, you know, we're at 24 pages now, which is great for me. That's 6 pages out of somebody else's story. And they're going to be tearing a layout apart that afternoon, getting 6 pages out of it. So that's the insider pool of that kind of stuff. So those things always served me well. Anytime I could do those kinds of pictures, even those Dougie Langlands and the head gamekeeper at Ard Verity out there, you know, deer stalking in the hills of Scotland. So here's the wall walk. Editors are gathering. What I want to point out here is over on the left. The tall guy is Chris Johns. The woman next to him is Sarah Lean. Chris Johns was a photographer here at the Capital Journal in 1977, 78. Sarah came to the Capital Journal in about 79, okay? So I'm a photographer showing a story there, and the editor of the magazine is now one of my former colleagues from 1979 at the Capital Journal, and the director of photography is from the Capital Journal, and there are 2 more directors of photography at National Geographic who were at the Capital Journal. And so it was a sort of an insider club. Some people refer to it as a mafia, but there you go, all right? So yeah, this is the layout on the wall. And what's going to happen now is you're going to go in there, editors are gathering together, the room's going to be filled with about 15 to 20 editors. Everybody's going to be, has their own favorite stories in the magazine. If they can poke a hole and get some pages for their story, they can make some hay, perhaps, for them. But basically, it's a room full of intense people trying like hell to make the absolute best magazine that anybody in the world can do with virtually unlimited resources. So the gathering of it, and then there's the editor. And the editor in this case was Chris Johns, and this was a whole issue there on the wall. And what's going to happen, though, is that the photographer is going to take the editor through the story and say, we start in the Columbia River, in the Columbia River Gorge with the glorious light of the river, and we go then on to farming in eastern Colorado, Columbia or Washington, and we go through this little narrative of the story. Here's a little bit from that video of the Columbia River layouts.
Taken to
25,
22,
22.
25.
You note that I've got my
25.
cheat sheet. I'm looking
Yeah.
for the facts because I got to be able to say all this stuff about
Fisher Code base.
economics.
Fortunately, we don't have too many occasions where we get to a stage where the coverage is complete. and I'm
Bill
looking at it
Allen,
on
the editor.
wall, And I just feel that it doesn't come together. Unfortunately, it does indeed happen. I've had that happen within the last year.
It's fine by me, guys. It's a great job.
Okay,
He was just saying there that he has cases when it doesn't come together and they kill the story at that point. So yeah, when you get through that, you're a pretty happy photographer. Now the covers. So there's Bobby Begay with one of the fish there on the cover of a magazine. But here comes Connie Phelps, the senior design director of National Geographic, talking about covers.
It really has to speak to you, you know, you can't
are all
be
mock-ups
reading the titling.
for one
It has to
issue.
really come at you and have a lot
Those
of
are all
impact.
mock-ups.
I like these two from the Columbia River and the Gypsy story. Also,
Okay. Did you see Cleopatra go by? We were never going to do a picture on the cover of a man holding a fish when you could run Cleopatra. No, I just kind of realized that. No. And I know that also because the film crew is there, that I know darn well that Bill is going to consider one of my pictures for the cover because it's all dramatic part of the story. But Cleopatra was going to be on the cover. So that's what happened there. Okay, finally, before we wrap up here, I want to tell one last story of doing all this kind of stuff. We're doing the Ogallala Aquifer story, and I have a picture of this lightning out there in the sandhills of Nebraska. And as we're putting the tray together, we can't figure out why it should be in a story about underground water, you know? And I finally tell Dave Griffin, who's doing the layouts with me, put it in. I promise you, I'll figure something out. I'll figure out why we're putting that picture in there. And we're getting ready for the wall walk and projection session to the editor. And it's at 2:00 in the afternoon, and it's 7 minutes till 2, and I still don't know. And Dave said, we got to get that picture out of there. And I said, I got 7 minutes. Hang on. You know, I can figure out something. Finally, I got to thinking, you know, this is a big storm and it's dumping a lot of water on the sandhills, and the sandhills are very different from the Ogallala. The sandhills absorb almost all of their water. So I wonder how much water falls on the sandhills. So I get on the internet at the time and I look up the total square miles of the sandhills of Nebraska, and I convert that to acres, all right? And then I find out how much the average rainfall, and now it's about 3 minutes till 2. And Bill Gray is the editor, and he was famous for just throwing horrible tantrums when anybody showed up late or screwed up anything, you know. And Dave Griffin is coming back to me and he goes, he's coming, you know, come on, man. I said, I've got 2 minutes, Dave, 2 minutes, Dave. I'm with you. I got it, you know, and I'm figuring out, and it's about 17 or 18 inches of rainfall in the Sandhills, Nebraska, and times the acres gives you about 1.5 times the number of acres gives you the numbers of acre feet that falling on the Sandhills of Nebraska. And we go in and we do the show. And when it comes to that picture on the screen, I said, and unlike the rest of the Ogallala Aquifer, the Sandhills of Nebraska get 17 million acre feet of water a year, almost all of which soaks into the ground. And we ran the story and we ran the picture in the pages of National Geographic. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Jim, thank you so much. We have time for some questions. Anyone has a question? I'm gonna turn the slide back on so I can see. All right. The question is, when were you at the Capitol Journal?
Do I what?
When were you at the Capitol Journal?
Can't do it.
When, what the years that you were at the,
When I was there at the Capitol Journal,
Yes.
about 1971 to 81 in round numbers. Yeah, yeah. So, and did you know Rich Clarkson? Oh, okay, very, very. Okay, well, thank you. We'll take a look at that. Yeah, it was an intense place to work. And Rich was an intense guy. So yeah, it was an intense place to work, but great too. Yeah, please.
That photo with the Milky Way and the tree, and the tree was lit up. Where was the lighting that lit the tree? Because I've tried to do that and I have failed miserably.
It's a flashlight, you know. I lit the tree with a flashlight. Yeah. And it's a little, it is tricky. But there's several things I can tell you about it, you know. So one is that was about 2005 or 6 that I was shooting that picture, and it was just at the point in which we could start doing Milky Way pictures. I bought a Canon 5D and a 35-1.4 lens because at 1.4 the Canon could do ISO 1600 and not look too bad. And that was 4 pictures across there, okay? So we could make that work. There were about 3 or 4 of us in the United States at the time who could do a picture of the Milky Way like that. Now they're everywhere, you know, okay? And that's 4 pictures in sections there. And first thing I did was the tree, and the hard part was getting it in focus because it's too dark for the autofocus to work. You know, so what I did was I took a pencil and I put a mark on the lens, and then I turned it a tiny little bit and put another mark, and then I took a picture of each one of those times, and then I went back and saw which one was sharpest, and then I turned it back to Mark 2, you know, something like that, right? And then, but for the lighting, what I'm doing is the trees where you are, okay, all right, yeah, and the camera's here, but I don't want to light it from here. So I want to light it from over there. So the camera is set so that it'll give me a 10-second delay. So I can hit that delay with my flashlight, you know, and go hit the shutter, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, run over there and get over there with my flashlight and then light up the tree, you know, except you can only do it for about 3 or 4 seconds. See, because it's so bright compared to the night sky. So you can only do about 3 or 4 seconds and getting it really even at that amount of time. And then finally, you don't want the light falling on the grass out in front. So I'd have to hold my flashlight's laying here like this, and I lay my hand here like this to cast a shadow so that none of the light falls on the ground over there. Yeah. So yeah, it really helped. Piece of cake. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
You described the process of winnowing out your images. What does National Geographic do with everything that doesn't make it? Obviously, we're sitting at the Historical Society. Do they save them? Do they send them out? Do they trash can them? What do they do?
Sarah, can you give it to me again there? I'm sorry.
What happens to the photos that aren't selected at National Geographic.
um, we owned them. The photographers owned them. That was one of the things that I was, for about 15 years, I was a member of the Photographers Advisory Board, which did contract negotiations, and the Geographic kept coming back and wanting to say, you know, we need all the copyrights, and then we'd say, no, sorry, we're not going to give you all the copyrights. So we kept the copyrights, then kept all those things. A lot of them went to edited again for stock agency. I did a book out of the Colorado River, you know, all kinds of other users found uses for those pictures. Some of them finally they just go away. Because, you know, I mean, out of 36,000 frames, you know, there's probably not much use in keeping a bunch of out of focus pictures. You know, everybody says keep every frame, you know, and I say, well, there's some stuff that's actually bad. You know, I'm not gonna do that. So I hope that it gives you some idea. But my office, yeah, is full of filing cabinets with slides, and of course then digital files after digital came along. Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. What is your opinion? Well, I remember when I used to do photography when I was younger and I was growing up, but I do remember that if people altered a photo, they were supposed to put a note that had been altered. But now with AI, people can do anything.
Yeah.
What is your opinion of how that is that just something to just take as part of, is that not really an unethical thing anymore, considered, you know, like,
I think just the question, your thoughts on altering images in the age of AI.
Well, yeah, we've been altering images long before AI came along, but yeah. So I would give you a little antidote to that. Yes, back when I was doing a lot of stock photography for people doing illustrations, things, you know, we did a lot of schlock pictures, but now there's no need to actually shoot those pictures. AI can produce them just fine, and they're miserable pictures, and so we're stuck with that. We had a case in the early before Photoshop, the Cytex machine. Cytex was the early Photoshop, and it was a whole computer of its own. And we had a case at National Geographic in which we had a story on Egypt, and we wanted to run the pyramids, but the best picture was horizontal, and it didn't fit the cover, and we moved the pyramid, and it was big stink. And it's been big stink for 30 years now. It never goes away, you know, so any of us who went through that kind of go, yeah, we understand that this stuff lasts when you do those kind of things. Now, there's one other aspect about this, though, that plays into how stories have developed since then and how. So, and I'll start this by saying that so you saw Dennis Dimmick editing 1,000 rolls of film. When your picture editor is looking through every last frame that you shot, it's hard to pull any hanky-panky on them, fake them something. They can see the frames coming. They can see when you did something, you know, you weren't supposed to do and all that. So that was a powerful tool for us to be able to verify that what we put in the magazine was real. Real, okay? And since then, though, as budgets got cut and whatnot, National Geographic went further and further into looking for stories that had already been shot by somebody, say. And this would happen through many of the photo festivals. So you'd have a photographer, and in this case, there was a photographer who was doing a story on the ivory trade. You know, the elephants and ivory, you know, the ivory trade. And he goes to some of the photo festivals, and everybody's telling him, you know, you've got a good story here, but you don't have the ivory picture yet. You don't have the tusk. You know, you got to have that picture, you know. And so he comes back to Geographic some 6 months later, and he's got the picture. There's somebody, some guy, native, in Africa, walking out of the bush, and he's got a tusk, on his shoulders, and that's the lead picture. And National Geographic runs the story. So when we're doing the layouts, then remember, Robert Gray and they're doing layouts. They're doing the layouts from low-res JPEGs. Okay, low-res JPEGs. Can't see a lot of detail on, but doesn't matter. You know, good enough for doing layouts. The picture ends up in the magazine at high res, and some eagle eye reader gets out the magnifying glass and finds the museum serial number on the tusk. Yeah, he got the tusk picture. He went and borrowed from some museum. And he takes it out there, and the guy, so that doesn't have anything to do with AI. It doesn't have anything to do with Photoshop. It's just plain old lying. Yeah, and you can do that too. Yeah, and then that's just as problematic, However, you have to say that the production of pictures and the volume of production of pictures today, and music, by the way, the number that I saw yesterday that flabbergasted me was that on these sites that do AI music, people doing AI music, or they're composers sitting in their rooms and doing things on the computer, they're uploading 7 million new songs a day. 7, and then you just go, oh my gosh, I don't know how to keep up with that. Anything else there?
So just, did you like 35 millimeter better than digital?
No. Well, I mean, they were both 35 millimeter, but 35 millimeter better than digital. No, I tell you what happened was when we shot Kodachrome, because that was the standard and the best of the time. And when Fujichrome came along, virtually everybody dumped Kodachrome because Fujichrome was better, just flat out better. And it gave you more shooting hours in the day, and the colors were better, and everything like this. Then I was doing that Great Plains story, and I had taken along the Nikon D100, which was kind of their first, affordable digital camera, to use as a kind of a Polaroid when I had to light something and you wanted to be able to see what the lighting looked like, But I started seeing what the files look like out of that thing, and I went, well, I'm done with film. No, I'm absolutely done with film. This is the last time I'm shooting film. And I just went straight over to digital, and most everybody else did too. And at the time, leading up to that, everybody said, digital will never match film because it had to be X number of megapixels to match, something like this, And we all believed that until we shot our first digital camera and saw those files, and we go, oh, that's not so bad. That's actually pretty good. And of course, now digital is so superior to film. It's just amazing. And I must say, all the people who are shooting film, who enjoy shooting film, more power to you. I won't go back. And anybody who actually had to shoot Kodachrome working as a working photographer, they don't want to go back either. They don't, just don't, no, don't go there. Don't go there. Anything else?
All right, this will be our last one.
Yeah. You're all very patient. Thank you very much.
So when does the actual story text come into play? Does the writer travel with you?
Oh, yep. How do you arrive at the same port? Yeah, that's an important thing to do. Yeah, so yes. So recognize, of course, that it could have been a writer that wrote that story proposal to begin with, so ideally what you would do is you stay in touch with each other. Sometimes you would actually be in the field together. Yeah, actually, there were good reasons. There are good reasons not to be in the field together. Writers want people to sit down and talk to them. Photographers want people to go out in the field and do what they do, and I don't want to sit there for 4 hours while a writer talks to somebody, And I don't want the conflict of attention. I don't want the subject going, I don't know who I'm supposed to be attending attention to, you know. If I could, I didn't travel with the writer unless there was, a really good reason. When we did the King James Bible with Adam Nicholson, yeah, he had written the book, and he was not only a great source, but he was good to work with in the field. You know, he was just a great guy. But you definitely want to make sure you're coordinating enough that you come back with essentially the same story. I don't have to have a picture of the thing that's in a paragraph that the writer wrote, but if we're doing food safety and the writer's talking about salmonella, yeah, then I want some petri dishes with salmonella. You know, I do want those things. And theoretically, and a lot of these stories are like this, you know, if anybody who researches the Colorado River, almost everybody's going to come up with the same issues. You know, if you're talking about water scarcity in the Colorado River, yeah, it's pretty well known of all these things. If not, then you work it out. Now, here's one last example: Ogallala Aquifer, and the writer who was assigned to it never understood that it was a water resource story. He never got that. He was a senior editor, been around forever, you know, but he never got that it was a water resource story. And he's out there doing a dry, it's as dry as a hot pistol, and you know, and a lot of phrases like this. But he never really kind of got around to understanding how an aquifer works, you know, and drawdowns and all that kind of stuff. So, and I have. So here's what happens. It goes back, and I show my pictures, and I've got all the aquifer stuff, and that pretty well cements in everybody's minds kind of what this story is going to be. And his story doesn't really match that. So they sent it back to him for a rewrite. No problem there. You're always going to do a rewrite, you know, and maybe a couple. So send it back to a rewrite. Editor doesn't like that. This is Bill Gray, that same guy. Editor doesn't like that. Sends it back for another rewrite. He doesn't like that rewrite. Sends it back for another rewrite. Doesn't like that rewrite. Sends it back for another rewrite. Doesn't like that rewrite. Finally, he sends him a memo. And I happened, somehow or another, I have the memo. And it was basically saying, it appears that what you want to do at National Geographic doesn't coincide with our goals on our coverages at this time. And, you know, essentially maybe says, you know, maybe there was other publications where it would be a better fit for you. And he quits, and they go to Erla Zwingli, who was one of the other editors, and give the story to Erla. Erla comes to me, gets all my research, goes out, develops her own research. 6 weeks later, she's back with a spot-on story. Yeah, so everyone, not many of those things would happen, and it's expensive as hell when it does. So you don't want that to happen if you can help it. So anyway, thanks for the question. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thanks for making that point.
Hopefully we'll see many of you next month on April 10th. Have a safe trip home. That was fabulous.
Oh, good.
So good. So